I was that child selling bread under the hot sun while others mocked me for being poor. But I never gave up and I never stopped making dua. Today, by Allah's mercy, the same hands that once carried bread now feed thousands. This is not my story alone. It is a story of sabr, risk, and how Allah honors those who trust in Him. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Sabr and Secrets for more stories that touch the heart. I was only a boy when life pushed me to the streets. While others carried school bags, I carried a tray of bread on my head. Some bought from me with pity. Others mocked me. "Bread seller, is this all you'll ever be?" Their words stung, but my hunger was louder. My family needed me, and poverty doesn't wait for pity. Each morning before stepping out, my mother would place her hand on my head and whisper, "Son, never be ashamed of honest work." The Prophet ﷺ said, "The best food a man eats is from what he earns with his own hands. Walk with dignity." So I walked barefoot on dusty roads, shouting, "Bread, fresh bread!" Sometimes under the scorching sun, sometimes in the pouring rain, and yet with every loaf I sold, I made a silent dua. Ya Allah, let this struggle be the seed of something greater. Don't let my story end on these streets. What I didn't know then was that the same boy who once ran after customers to sell a loaf of bread would one day stand before crowds feeding thousands with his own hands. Selling bread was survival, not a choice. Some days I returned home with an empty tray, my pockets heavy with coins. Other days I came back with unsold loaves, fearing my mother's tears more than the hunger in my belly. I still remember one afternoon. I stood in front of a school gate, balancing bread on my head, when a group of students laughed at me. "Look at him, selling bread while we're preparing for university." One of them threw a coin on the ground and shouted, "Pick it up, bread boy." My face burned with shame, but I didn't bend to pick it. I whispered under my breath, "Ya Allah, honor me one day in front of those who humiliate me." But not everyone mocked me. Some kind souls would stop and ask, "Why are you not in school?" I would smile faintly and say, "Because this is my classroom. Life is teaching me here." What they didn't know was that every night, after selling bread, I would sit under the dim light of a kerosene lamp, reading borrowed books. My clothes smelled of bread, my fingers rough from carrying trays, but my heart still dreamed. Dreamed of a day when I wouldn't just feed my family, but feed an entire nation. And that dream was about to meet its first opening. It was a scorching afternoon. I had been walking for hours, bread tray on my head, when I stopped in front of a small office to rest in the shade. A man in a neat suit stepped outside. He looked at me, then at the bread. "Do you sell this every day?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I replied quietly. He bought a loaf, but instead of leaving, he studied me. "You're young. You should be in school." I lowered my eyes. School is for those who can afford it. For me, this is school. Something in my answer made him pause. He handed me the money, but his eyes stayed fixed on me. "Come back tomorrow, same time." I thought it was just another customer, but when I returned the next day, he handed me something that changed my life. A scholarship form. "This is for boys like you, bright, hardworking, but struggling. Fill it. Try." That night, I held the paper like it was gold. My mother's eyes filled with tears as she whispered, "Ya Allah, is this your way of opening a door?" I filled the form with trembling hands, and weeks later, the letter arrived. I had been accepted. From the dusty streets of selling bread, I stepped into a classroom. A classroom where, for the first time, my dreams didn't feel impossible. And as I walked into that new school, I whispered the same dua I had always carried in my chest. Ya Allah, honor me one day in front of those who humiliate me. I didn't know then, but that dua was already on its way to being answered. School was not the paradise I imagined. Yes, the walls were painted, the chairs smooth, and the books smelled of newness. But poverty, it followed me inside those gates. Other boys came with polished shoes. Mine were torn. They came with lunchboxes. I came with nothing but a bottle of water. They spoke of vacations and fathers who drove cars. I spoke of nothing, because silence was easier than shame. But I carried something they didn't: hunger. Not just hunger for food, but hunger to succeed. So I read by candlelight when others slept. I memorized lessons while carrying bread on my head. I used the streets as my blackboard, tracing numbers in the dust whenever I had no paper left. Still, the mockery came. "Bread boy," they would laugh. "Your place is in the market, not here." Each word stabbed, but I swallowed them whole, turning their insults into fuel. And every evening, I still sold bread. Because while education gave me hope, bread kept my family alive. Sometimes I would run late to class because a customer delayed me. Sometimes I would doze off at my desk because dawn had been spent baking with my mother. But every time I wanted to give up, I remembered my dua. Ya Allah, honor me one day in front of those who humiliate me. I didn't know it then, but the tests I endured in that classroom were preparing me for a future far greater than I imagined. And one day, that future knocked on my door. It was an ordinary afternoon. The sun was hot, my tray of bread was lighter than usual, and my legs ached from walking all day. I had just returned home when my teacher appeared at our door. My heart dropped. Had I done something wrong? But in his hands was a letter. He smiled and said, "Your hard work has not been unnoticed." I took the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside, written in bold, was something I never believed could happen to a boy like me. "Congratulations, you have been awarded a full scholarship to the university." I stared at the paper, unable to breathe. My mother's hands flew to her face, tears streaming as she whispered, "Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah." That night, I could not sleep. I sat outside under the stars, clutching that letter to my chest. I thought of the boys who mocked me, of the hunger that never left my stomach, of the countless times I almost gave up. And then I thought of Allah's promise. "And whoever fears Allah, He will make for him a way out and provide for him from where he does not expect." In Qur'an chapter 65, verse 2 and 3. That scholarship was not from my teacher, not from the school, not even from my effort. It was from Allah. A door I never expected, opened by the one who hears the whispers of a boy selling bread on the street. But I didn't know. This was only the beginning. Because university would test me in ways I had never been tested before. University was nothing like I imagined.
I thought a scholarship would mean ease, respect, and comfort, but instead, it brought new struggles. The first week, I entered the grand lecture hall. Students around me wore neat clothes, carried shiny laptops, spoke fluent English, and there I was, with my old bag, patched shoes, and a notebook I bought with the last coins from selling bread. Some students laughed quietly. One whispered, "Is this the bread seller they gave a scholarship to?" Their words cut deeper than hunger ever had. At night, when others ate in the cafeteria, I often sat under a tree with just water. Some days I fasted, not out of choice, but out of necessity. Yet in those nights of hunger, my sujood grew longer. My tears wet the prayer mat as I whispered, "Ya Allah, you brought me here. Don't leave me halfway. Give me strength to finish." Slowly, I found a rhythm. I sat in front during lectures, asked questions, worked harder than anyone else. Professors began to notice. Some students who once mocked me began to admire me, though many still looked down. But one day, as I walked past the masjid on campus, I overheard a group of students discussing something. "Did you hear?" one said. "The university is offering a paid tutoring program. Only the brightest can apply." My heart raced. Could this be my chance? Not just to survive, but to finally support my mother and maybe eat with dignity. I knew this was an opportunity I couldn't miss. But would they accept the boy who once sold bread on the streets? The notice for the tutoring program was clear. We are seeking exceptional students to mentor others. Applicants must show academic excellence and strong character. My hands trembled as I held the paper. I had the grades, top of the class, despite everything, but the whispers followed me everywhere. "The bread seller, he thinks he can teach us? He should be selling snacks, not applying for this." Still, I filled out the form. When I submitted it, the clerk looked at me with raised brows. "You?" she said, almost in disbelief. "Yes," I replied, quietly. "Me." The interview day came. I wore the only shirt I owned that wasn't torn, ironed carefully with the old charcoal iron my mother used back home. In the panel room, professors asked me difficult questions: mathematics, critical thinking, even moral dilemmas. I answered with clarity, fueled not just by study, but by the hunger of someone who had no other choice. One professor leaned forward and asked, You are the boy who used to sell bread by the roadside, aren't you?" My heart stopped. "Yes, sir," I whispered. The panel exchanged looks. Some smiled, some frowned. When I walked out, I didn't know whether I had impressed them or confirmed their doubts. That night, I prayed Qiyam, tears running down my face. "Ya Allah, if this is khair for me, open the way. If not, give me patience." Days later, the list was posted on the notice board. Students crowded around it, murmuring. My heart pounded as I pushed through, my eyes scanning the page. And then there it was, my name, among the selected tutors. The same boys who once mocked me now stared in silence. Some even muttered, "Subhanallah, the bread seller made it." But this was only the beginning, because with the small salary I was about to earn, doors I never imagined would begin to open. The first time I received my pay as a tutor, it wasn't much. To others, it was just a small stipend, barely enough for pocket money. But to me, it was Rizq, the first honest earning of my life that came not from selling bread on the roadside, but from my mind, my hard work, and Allah's mercy. I held the notes in my hand for a long time. They felt heavy, not because of their value, but because of the journey they represented. That evening, I didn't run to buy new shoes or eat at a fancy restaurant like others might. Instead, I went straight to the little stall where I once sold bread. The seller looked at me in surprise. "You again? I thought you stopped." I smiled. "Not to sell today, but to buy." I purchased bread, more than I could carry, and took it back to the streets. But this time, I didn't sell. I gave. To the hungry boys who once mocked me, to the children who looked at bread the way others looked at gold, to the old woman who always stretched her hand, whispering, "For the sake of Allah." That night, I returned to my small hostel room with nothing left in my wallet, but my heart was overflowing. I knelt down, placed my forehead on the mat, and whispered, "Ya Allah, you lifted me from being the seller to being the giver. Never let me forget these streets. Never let me forget where I came from." What I didn't know was that this small act of giving, one loaf of bread given sincerely for Allah's sake, would come back to me years later in a way I could never imagine. Because the seed of sadaqah, once planted, always grows. A few weeks later, while I was teaching at the small madrasa, a man walked in. He was well-dressed, with a face that showed both kindness and authority. He watched me as I explained a lesson on patience from Surah Al-Asr. When the class ended, he called me aside. "Young man," he said, "I've been observing you for some time. The way you teach, the way you connect with the children, it's rare." I lowered my gaze, unsure what to say. He continued, "I heard what you did last week, buying bread and giving it out to the poor. Do you know who told me?" I shook my head. He smiled. "The old woman you gave bread to. She comes to the masjid every day. She prayed for you, and the whole community heard her dua." I felt a shiver run down my spine. The man placed his hand on my shoulder. "I run an NGO that feeds the poor and educates orphans. We've been searching for someone with sincerity, not just certificates. Would you like to join us?" My heart stopped for a moment. Was this real? Just weeks ago, I was a street boy selling bread. Now someone was asking me to help run a project that would feed hundreds. I whispered, "Yes, I would be honored." That day, I realized something. One act of sadaqah, one loaf of bread given sincerely for Allah's sake, can change the course of your entire destiny. And that was the beginning of a journey I never imagined. From the dusty roadside to a platform that touched thousands. They said I was too poor to marry him, but Allah wrote our nikah. My sister, my brother, this story will melt your heart and remind you that rizq and love are in the hands of Allah alone. Before we begin, kindly subscribe to this channel, like this video, comment Subhanallah, and tell us where you are watching from. Nigeria, the UK, US, Canada, or anywhere in the world. Your support helps us spread these reminders far and wide. Now, let's begin this emotional journey. I was never ashamed of being poor. I grew up in a small home with walls that carried more dua than decorations, and a mother who raised us with sabr instead of silver. But poverty has a way of making you feel small, especially when you stand in front of those who measure a human being by their wealth, not their worth. When I saw him for the first time, it wasn't at a wedding or fancy gathering. It was in the masjid after Fajr. His forehead was marked with sujud, and his words were soft when he greeted the elders. I didn't think much of it then, but as days passed, I heard more about him. A righteous young man, people said, educated, respectful, and loved by his family. And then one day, a quiet hope lit in my heart. Could it be possible that someone like him would one day look my way? But then I heard the whispers too. She is too poor. She has nothing to offer. Her family can't even afford a proper wedding. Every word was like a knife pressed deeper into my heart. But I told myself, Rizq is from Allah, and so is marriage. If it is written, not even the wealth of the world can take it away from me. And that is how the storm began. The storm began when his family started looking for a wife for him. Proposals came from wealthy homes, daughters of businessmen, women with gold that sparkled more than their deen. And in the middle of all that, my name was mentioned. I still remember the silence in their living room when someone said, "What about her? She is righteous, she prays, she is known for her good character." But the silence was quickly broken. She is too poor. She will be a burden, not a blessing. Marry someone who can bring wealth into this family, not poverty. Those words pierced me. Though they were never said to my face, somehow whispers always find their way to the ears of the poor. I cried that night, not because I was rejected, but because I feared that maybe they were right. What did I really have to offer? No gold, no status, no expensive clothes. Just a heart that made dua at night and hands that had learned to live with little. But when I opened the Qur'an, my eyes fell on the verse, "If they are poor, Allah will enrich them out of His bounty." That verse lit a flame in my heart. I whispered to myself, if Allah wrote it, no one can erase it. And so I kept making dua, unseen by the world, but heard by the Lord of the worlds. Days turned into weeks. The proposals kept coming to his family, each one wealthier, more prestigious than the last. And me? I kept hearing whispers of rejection. She is not beautiful enough. She is not from our class. She is not what we want for our son. Each word stung like a thorn pressed deeper into my heart. But he was different. He saw me not with the eyes of the dunya, but with the lens of the akhirah. He would tell his mother gently, beauty fades, wealth disappears, but faith, iman, remains. Yet his words fell on ears sealed by pride. They wanted status, they wanted show, they wanted a bride they could boast about in gatherings. One evening, as I sat alone, the pain became too heavy. I raised my hands and whispered through tears, Ya Allah, if this is good for my deen, my dunya, and my akhirah, then bring it to me, no matter how impossible it seems. But if it will harm me, then remove it from my heart. That night, I slept with swollen eyes, but a calmer soul, because I realized something. It was never about them. It was always about Allah.